Just a couple of notes before we get started. Just want to let you know, first of all, I'm a bit croaky tonight. I don't know about in your corner of Australia, but it's suddenly gotten cold here, and just along with it, I managed to pick up a cold. So I'm a little bit croaky. I will be sipping water from time to time, but I'm confident we can get through this beautifully. So tonight we will have a particular plan. What we're going to be doing is we're going to start off by just doing a quick recap of what drama therapy is. So I'm wondering if you have arrived here because you have some knowledge about drama therapy, or if you've attended one of the Icon information sessions before. But regardless, I think it's really good for us to just go and do a quick revisit of that. Then we're going to look at the application of drama therapy, in particular to improve wellbeing for youth, for young people, or people generally with autism spectrum disorders, which may be referred to as ASDs in this PowerPoint, and also for people with acquired brain injuries. And in each of these instances, I'm going to give you some examples of ways in which I have actually used drama therapy. And then at the end of the evening, we will have question time. So, quick recap here. What is drama therapy? So drama therapy really is based just very broadly on this idea that we can take the plot of someone's life experience, or the feelings or thoughts that they have, and then we can play them out in a variety of ways. And through this playing out, discover, uncover, develop, and really work into the deep understandings of what's going on for a person in certain circumstances. And the ways that we might do that is use a metaphoric story or a little vignette of something. We might freshly create a script. It is possible that people can rehearse different ways of being, for instance, a different response to a certain circumstance. It's possible to use this to help really understand and experience a circumstance from another's perspective. Of course, this is really very valuable when we're talking about autism spectrum disorders and people who sometimes struggle to really understand another person's experience or put themselves in someone else's shoes. Drama therapy is fabulous because you can actually intentionally step into someone else's shoes. And also drama therapy is a great tool for trying out different roles or different responses to the world. All of this, however, which can be achieved in any sort of drama capacity, I guess, is done with great intent of creating this psychotherapeutic outcome for the client. So it's not about putting on a great play, it's not about necessarily having fun with drama, but about using the drama to intentionally uncover, unwrap, and work with the challenges that we face at times in our day-to-day living. So what else is drama? Is where we externalize the problem. So drama therapy enables us to put the problem aside from the person and say, look, the problem is the problem, you're okay, but the problem is something we'll deal with separate to you. You are not a problem. The condition, the attitude, the approach, the problem, the behaviour, that's the problem. Drama therapy is also trial and error, so it's about rehearsal. You know, when you practice something, you subtly shift it each time. And in particular, when we think about trying to be different in the world, when we think about trying to have a different relationship with somebody, trying to respond differently to a challenge in life, sometimes it takes some rehearsal for us to actually fine-tune that. So drama therapy provides this terrific opportunity. In drama therapy too, it's really important that the process is critiqued. What that does is that enables this understanding of human nature generally, our own and others, what actually happens. So the critique is really important, which is not necessarily something that happens in, for instance, a drama class. Drama therapy is sometimes directed and sometimes improvised. Oftentimes, the opportunity to just deal with what rises is really valuable, and that is the improvisation factor. But at other points, it can be valuable to be using stories that have particular themes, particular challenges, or with which the clients can really identify, to actually direct and manage the processes as part of understanding ourselves and creating that therapeutic environment. Drama therapy can be great fun, there's no doubt about it, but it also at times it is deeply moving or deeply challenging. And the skills of the drama therapist really manage this process so that there is a psychotherapeutic outcome from the process, rather than simply having the experience and not having the support to integrate that new knowledge. So, why would you use drama therapy working with youth? This is the group we're going to look at first. So if we think about youth development, there are a number of tasks that are required for us to adequately traverse through our years and reach adulthood reasonably stable, reasonably got it together.
Excuse me, Glenda, sorry.
Of course, we continue growing and developing.
Sorry, Glenda. Are you there? Can I just get you to turn your camera off, please, just to improve the functionality? It's a bit jumpy.
Sure.
Thank you.
I can do that. So, in youth development, the sorts of things that are happening are things like adjusting to the sexually maturing body, developing abstract thinking skills, discovering the complexities of human relationships, also working out how to cope with things, decision making, problem solving, conflict resolution, and alongside that, actually developing morals and values and examining belief systems. Adolescents during those years will need to understand and express much more complex emotional experiences than they did as younger children. They will be forming friendships that are close and supportive, looking at those key aspects of who am I, understanding the self. They'll be meeting the demands of increasingly mature roles and responsibilities. And they will also need to be renegotiating what it is to live at home, for instance, with adults in a parenting role. So the key challenge from a neurological perspective is that the prefrontal cortex, so this frontal part of the brain, isn't fully developed until a person reaches 23 and 25 years of age. Even there are some areas that they might suspect take until almost 30 years of age to be fully developed. And of course, the prefrontal cortex manages mood regulation. So mood regulation is a huge challenge for many adolescents who are dealing with all of those other roles and needs throughout those adolescent years. So they have an adult brain in many ways, but still have a childlike mood management system in the brain. And the way that this changes is on the job. This on-the-job learning is what really sets drama therapy up well to facilitate navigate the changes through those adolescent years. So, how does it help? Well, drama therapy can provide a contained space to explore. It provides opportunities for social and communication development, and what we're talking about here is not just verbal, but the non-verbal communication as well. Having clear, structured sessions can allow adolescents to take risks. So in those sessions, in that framework, adolescents can try out all sorts of different things, knowing increasingly that the space is safe and managed, and that if they do have an angry outburst, if they do explore some of their deeper feelings, that is manageable and safe to do so in that space. Collaborative working can help adolescents express and explore difficult feelings about these interpersonal relationships. Drama therapy can build confidence and self-esteem and so on, increases emotional literacy and social skills and cooperation. Of course, it's a creative act. And we know that one of the things that's so seriously missing now in a lot of childhood experience and increasingly more in the school experience is the opportunity to be truly creative. There are so many limitations about how things should be done and what's required and what competencies someone's expected to achieve. And that opportunity to be really creative is certainly becoming harder and harder. And yet it is creativity that is really the key aspect in inventiveness, in problem solving and so on. So it's so important to be exercising creative skills. Drama therapy works with imagination, provides an expression of choice, and in that comes that opportunity to be self-responsible and to affirm oneself through those choices. And it creates opportunities to conceptualize what's going on the inside in the outer world. So what might it look like for youth? One of the exercises that I've used quite a lot for youth is an exercise called thought bubbles. So I've used this with youth in detention and also with groups of young people when there has been family disharmony. So what do? Well, in this circumstance, what we might do is ask one of the young people if they could choose someone to play themselves. So a young person who's having some difficulties, for instance, with authority. You might ask this young person to choose someone to play themselves, and then ask this same young person to choose other people within the group to be the people with whom they have the conflict. So it may be that it is parents, it may be that it is some supervisory people, it may be that it is case managers and so on. And so what happens then is that little group comes together and the young person suggests a topic that they might discuss. And given some instructions about how the young person feels about this, the person who is playing this person's role will actually act out what he imagines would happen. And the other people within that relationship with whom this youth is in conflict with, they will also respond as they imagine those people would respond. During that, the remaining people in the group can act out the thought bubbles. So instead of just hearing what is being said in that relationship and what is being said with that small group to each other, the thoughts that are prompting those statements are also being voiced. And a young person in the audience might think, when the parent says, I expect you home tonight by midnight, or you will not be allowed to have the car tomorrow, a young person in the audience might come up and put their hand on the shoulder of that person playing the parent and may voice what's going on in that parent's head. So the thought bubble. And so the young person puts their hand on the shoulder of the person playing the parent and says, oh, I'm so worried. I cannot sleep when he's not here. I'm scared he's getting into trouble. And so what happens is the thinking behind what's voiced becomes more apparent from each of the participants in the thought bubble action. And this young man may, for instance, say to the group in the scene, may say, I hate you all, you're all ridiculous, I'm not doing it. And someone may come and put their hand on his shoulder and say, I'm so scared that if I do this, they'll think that they can walk all over me. So again, we get to hear what's happening in the thoughts of the people, as opposed to just hearing the dialogue. This is really terrific for youth to do. It's remarkable that where they may not see or consciously acknowledge the underlying motivations behind people's responses to them or dialogue for themselves, they can certainly see it for other people. And it actually brings it out into the open and makes it much more transparent about the challenges between youth potentially and those people with whom they're having conflict. So thought bubbles is a really terrific exercise. Very hard to explain, I might add, without doing it. Another exercise that's really terrific are monologue scenes. And for teens, I've used this in a number of circumstances. One in particular that will stay in my mind for a long time was working with a group of girls who were 15 to 17 years old in a school setting. And these girls had all lost a family member to suicide. So I think there was 7 in the group. And as we had done a number of activities, because it was an arts therapy program that I was running. But at some point, I provided them with about 20 different short monologues that were speaking from the heart. So there was some from Shakespeare, there was one from the movie Monsters, Inc. There was one from Mrs. Doubtfire. So a number of different short monologues. And I laid them out and I asked them to pick them up and read them and think about if there was somebody that they would like to say that to, or some scene where they would like to see that happening. And if necessary, they could change 1 or 2 of the words to make it really work for them. So these girls chose these monologues, read them for themselves, decided who they wanted it to be read to or said to, more than read, and how they wanted this to look. I then asked each individual student, young girl, to come up and to choose from the remaining group members people to play themselves, themselves and the other members that they hoped would be in attendance for this monologue. And so one young girl in particular, she chose her auntie and her uncle, and she chose her brother and her mother and herself. And she asked the student who was playing her to read this monologue, and she explained where she wanted people to stand and sit and how she wanted this read. And she was able to direct this. And the first reading through, incidentally, I asked the young people to read it through themselves a few times beforehand, or to read it out loud, go off quietly and read it out loud for themselves, so that they become fairly fluent in it. But she was able to direct this until she had this person look at exactly the person she wanted them to look at and say the line with exactly the inflection that she wanted for each of the people in this family setting. And her class, her group mates, I guess you could say, the other participants, actually acted this out for her. And for each of these girls, it was incredibly powerful to be able to do this, to say something that they hadn't been able to say and to see it being acted out. The next step was to give them the opportunity to step into their own role and do it themselves. Some of them chose to do it, and some of them still found it too difficult to actually voice those things that they really wanted to say. But the process itself was extremely empowering, and for this particular group of girls had such long-lasting implications that I saw one of these girls several years later when she was doing her masters at university, and she saw me at Flinders University and raced up and spoke about how important that was, and how a number of times she would be standing surrounded, around her family and family members, and the lines would be going through her head, and she would be feeling like she had a voice. So, really powerful exercise. And of course, you can do that too with things like youth bullying, which is another example of when I have actually used that. Just want to check in with you, Kathy. Am I being much more easily heard now?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. So.
Am I much
no, that's going well. No, all good. All great.
Terrific.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. So I'd like to just move on now to talking about why you would use drama therapy for people working with, why you would use drama therapy for people with autism spectrum disorders. So some people, and certainly not everybody with autism spectrum disorders, need additional support in a number of areas. Of course, people with autism spectrum disorders are as different as everybody is in the general population, so we can't generalise too much, but there are some areas in which they are challenges are well documented, and where drama therapy can be really valuable to work with. So those sorts of areas are the theory of mind concept. So that is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Being able to recognise things like body language and facial expression, being able to predict social outcomes, making friends or developing relationships, developing tolerance for certain sensory experiences. So some people have very low tolerance for somebody even jiggling their foot in a classroom environment, or it may be certain sounds, it may be for certain tactile experiences. People may, with autism spectrum disorders, may have difficulty in learning how to mask effectively. People often say, why do you want to mask? Why don't you want people to be authentic? But our society actually depends hugely upon the ability to mask and unmask very quickly and with great intent. And an example I'll give is that a very long time ago I was working with a group of young people with Asperger's syndrome, and we were sitting in a restaurant, and the young man that I was sitting opposite, so we, as part of the social skills building, we would always go out to dinner after the group. And he was looking across at some people who were flirting in another corner. And we'd spent a lot of time actually working on recognising how people's body language correlated with whether or not they liked somebody and how much they liked them. And this young man, at the top of his voice, made it very clear that he thought someone was going to get lucky that night. And of course, when we think about it, we do know that. We knew what was happening. I could look across it and certainly tell a good deal about what was going on. And he was amazed that we all knew that, and they knew that, but he wasn't allowed to say it. That he had to pretend that he didn't know that was what was going on, and certainly not to talk about it loudly. So I think we need to, in order to be social creatures, to know when to mask and when to unmask. The problem with masks, of course, are that sometimes we wear them when we're unaware of that we are wearing them and how they are impacting our lives. But for people with autism spectrum disorders, learning how to mask effectively, it can be really valuable. And also, people with autism spectrum disorders routinely need additional support in being seen and valued in society, rather than being shunned and kept out of so many different areas. It's less prevalent now than it was when I was younger, but certainly being able to play sports, being able to join social clubs, being able to join a local theatre group was very challenging for people with autism spectrum disorders. And they were routinely not seen or valued in society. And so that's still something that we need to be paying attention to. So how might drama therapy help people with autism spectrum disorders? Well, they can practice, understand, examine, all the non-verbal communications, so things like body language and facial expression. They can engage the imagination to try and foster that ability to be in someone else's shoes. You can use exercises that help them with prediction and rehearsing social situations. They can understand reciprocity in relationships, as we just talked about. Again, practice that ability to mask appropriately. You can even use dramatherapy to provide some slow, systematic desensitization to sensory stimuli that's normally aversive. So somebody who does not like being touched, you can use a dramatherapy model to slowly introduce and desensitize someone to, for instance, touch, so that it doesn't impair their social engagement. It can improve self-worth and social acceptance, and people can actually have a voice, a presence, and be valued in their community, in particular in some of the activities that they might do that are, for instance, public performance, which we'll talk about in a moment. For younger children, in particular those who are less verbal, things like mirroring, where the therapist follows the child, and exploring those moods, so actually continuing to unwrap through a bodily, full body approach to a mood exploration. Sensory experiences can certainly be managed with children who are younger and those who are less verbal. And imaginative play, in particular with puppets or other toys in the first instance, where children find it very difficult to personify an inanimate object. This will actually sort of help once the process has begun, using the imagination to then transfer some of those skills into, for instance, a social setting. So you could be doing things like role-playing, expressing difficult feelings or experiences, particularly if you don't have the good social management of language. This is a really good opportunity. You can explore lots of characters. You can use imaginative scene making to predict outcomes. You can direct scenes so that it facilitates attention to the tiny detail of a character portrayal, for instance, or an engagement, which can be really helpful for learning and understanding how to interpret social situations. And you can obviously provide people with skills to engage in community theatre. So I'm going to give you a little example. So this is Three Little Pigs. Now this is not so much for children, even though it's a child's story, traditionally a child's story, but I'd be using this with perhaps young adults with, or adolescents with Asperger's syndrome. And I have done it quite a few times. So if we think about the story of the Three Little Pigs, there are three distinctly different characters. There's a fairly scared and timid little pig, which would be the pig who built his house out of straw, very quickly grabbed the quickest sort of material he could use and made his little house out of straw. That may not fit for everybody's version of the story, but certainly it's the way I've used it here. And then the pig who had the brick house would be perhaps the capable and resourceful protector pig. So the pig who would look after the others, who would, do the hard yards, was tough and resilient. And then the big bad wolf. Now these are three very different characters. Now if you absolutely dial this story up and make it bigger and broader, bigger and louder than it's ever been, you can get it to appeal to a group of young people who have autism spectrum disorders. And then what you do is start to play with the role. Initially what you might do is ask the person who feels the most timid, or is usually the most timid, to play the shy little pig. And the person who's the most outgoing or outspoken to be the wolf. And the strong protector type to play the other little pig that, gathers them all into the brick house and then says, look, let's make a fire because the wolf's coming down the chimney. And in doing that role, first of all, you're getting people engaging with one another, thinking about the characters, thinking about what it's like to feel that way, identifying what's happening in their body and so on. But the real beauty of this is you then are able to swap the roles around. And you can actually ask perhaps the shy person to play the wolf, and the strong protector type to actually play the timid little pig, and to actually help them to try and really embrace and understand the perspective of those other roles, those other characters, and also to unwrap some of that for themselves. It may be that this rehearsal of playing the protector pig or to play the wolf may support the shy person to actually learn to project their voice more, to project themselves out into the world a little more. So obviously, working with discussing the pros and cons of roles and types and stereotypes can be really useful. You can also do things like testing romantic scenes. Now, this is something that is, again, with young people with Asperger's, very frequently they really want a relationship, but they don't really know how to make it happen. They don't know how to give the necessary signs, how to pick up on whether or not they're desired. And again, I can give an example of a young man who really believed that he'd given all the necessary signs, and the next step was for him to grab them somewhere inappropriate. And so for him, he was getting in a lot of trouble because he just didn't know how to manage the gap in between where someone was a friend or an acquaintance that he felt attracted to, and how to actually turn them into somebody that he could either hug and have a closer relationship with, or ultimately to have a very intimate relationship with. So one of the ways you can do this is take a scene from a favoured movie and actually have the participants act it out under the direction from the person who wants the relationship. So they need to really, really think carefully and examine carefully what's happening with both of the characters. Clearly, you have to carefully select these scenes to make sure that you get something that's appropriate for that learning and that rehearsal. So then what can happen is you can take it in many different directions. You can actually explore what would happen if the advances weren't welcome or if the signals weren't there. You can explore what would happen if an inappropriate action occurred, and so on. And the person who is seeking the relationship and seeking to understand how to make it happen can then actually step into the role and try it and actually see how well they go with it. And finally, I just want to point out that public performance is something that, although we don't consider it core in therapeutic practice, it is something that can still be incredibly valuable. So in 2002, I worked with the drama group of Autism Association of South Australia, they're called AAA, and we actually performed Bald Prima Donna. It's a piece of absurd theatre, so very difficult to do with people who struggle often with absurdity. But it really gave wonderful opportunity to try and make meaning of everything that we were seeing, and to try and make meaning of how to put this together in a way that had some purpose and had some authenticity about each of the individual roles. So we had a year of rehearsals. There were 12 people between 18 and 32 years of age. And we explored the wacky play first, and then used the entire process to reflect on things like relationship breakdowns, family and legacy, flirting, the law, and the psychological profiling of firefighters, if you know the play. And over 4 nights it was performed to over 400 people, and had terrific review in the Advertiser, and had a lot of other fringe performers attend. And the value, the self-esteem there, and the sense of competence that these young people achieved as a result of doing this was outstanding, and in itself could be considered a very highly therapeutic outcome. Of course, it needs to be managed carefully. And I think this is where having the skills and knowledge as a drama therapist is so important, to deal with the things that come up along the way. Okay, so I want to talk now about working with people with acquired brain injuries. So there are a number of challenges for people with acquired brain injuries, and these can be extraordinarily varied. There are very frequently medical challenges, but there are often changes in physical and sensory abilities, changes in the ability to think and learn, and in particular memory loss. The example I'm going to give you shortly of a particular program that we ran had a young man, oh, he actually wasn't that young, had a man in the group who had anterograde amnesia, which meant that he would go to the bathroom, and when he came out, he wouldn't know where he was, who he was with, or what he was doing. So his memory was so very short term that it was quite a challenge. People have changes in behaviour and personality and can have communication difficulties, in particular with speech. So, dramatherapy can help people with acquired brain injuries in a number of ways. That includes things like the opportunity to represent experience with the whole body rather than just words. And as I said before, because people often have language difficulties as a result of an acquired brain injury, being able to do it in a much broader sense with the body, it can often help people feel better heard. Again, it can be a case of rehearsing family and social interactions, and it can certainly help people to get to know the self again. After an acquired brain injury, it is not at all uncommon for people to feel like they have changed so much from the person they were before, that they need significant assistance to become and get to know, I guess, the person that they've become. And finally, here, I think there's a really important aspect that people have an enormous amount of rehabilitation, formal rehabilitation, but dramatherapy can actually provide that rehabilitation through being motivated just to do it, just to be involved in the program. And it's not about having speech therapy, it's about learning how to read a script. It might be that they need to get up regularly from this position, and where they may want to just sit in front of the television at home the whole time and only do the moving when they're actually at their physical therapy. When they are engaging in drama activities, there is a different motivation for doing it, and it can significantly change the outcome, as again happened with one particular participant in the project that I'm about to talk about. So this particular project is called the Walk Through Walls project. I'm just going to explain this while these slides run through. Actually, I might just pause this for a moment, sorry. I just want to say first up that the photographs I'm about to show you come from the film recording that was taken for the participants. They have actually granted us permission to use these in educational settings and so on. And because they have come directly off the film, they're not great quality, but I feel confident that you'll be able to see something about what the progress was like. And I've actually just put these on, and I will talk over the lot, not specific to each picture, but about the whole project. So the Walk Through Walls project actually began with about 30 participants, all people who had acquired brain injuries, who were connected to or referred through the Community Re-Entry Program, which is based at Flinders University and is, although it's a community-funded project, a government-funded project, it is not run by the university. University provides the premises and students for support. So this group decided that they wanted to do a play, and the manager of the service at the time really thought it would be valuable to do a drama therapy process because the needs of these people were fairly significant. So we held some auditions so that in order for people to participate in this group, we asked them if they would audition because we thought it was so important for them to be willing to engage in a drama therapy process. And of course, if someone was going to attend but only sit in the chair, then perhaps it wasn't going to be the best method for them to, or the best medium for them to engage in. So people came together, and apart from doing lots of improvisation and theatre games and so on, what we did was we got people to start telling their stories about their experience of before their brain injury, and then their experience of brain injury and recovery. And this was a very slow and at times challenging task for some people whose language was severely disrupted, their ability to articulate what was important to them. Well, it could be very challenging. And also for those who had memory losses, because they could often only remember small parts of their experience. But these people got together in small groups with mentors and facilitators to tell their stories, and those mentors wrote down lots of information for each of the participants. During the week, I actually would go through all of these stories and try to ask a half a dozen questions or so that would fill the gaps in these people's story that they were telling. And so as the weeks went by, we were gathering more complete and richer stories from people who sometimes could only give 2 or 3 short phrases in a week. These stories were really remarkable, and we so wanted to capture them. And we wanted to capture them authentically as they were for the participants when they told them. And also we wanted to capture the general theme and combine that into a play so that ultimately the group would be performing on stage. And of course, this required a great deal of trust. So there was a lot of activity involved in getting people to engage with one another, trust the facilitators, and trust the process. As the weeks went by, I began to think about the underlying themes in people's stories. There were quite a number that were really clearly repeated themes for all of these people. And so I was very slowly developing the framework of a script, which I then worked with the participants to flesh out, to see if we could create a fictional story that captured the themes of these people, but and was a story that we would actually be able to act out on stage. Or, sorry, they would be able to act out on stage. Here we have the character Louise in the wheelchair, and Louise had one of the key roles. In the end, I think it was 18 or 20 performers with acquired brain injuries, and one mentor performed the play. That was it. There was no other mentors performing. They were sitting with and supporting the clients on stage, but they weren't actually performing. So finally what happened was that we did a reading of the script, and people felt that they were that they gave feedback, and we adjusted it, and we kept shifting it, and we included poems that they had written, we included particular lines that they wanted in there. And so the script was written collaboratively with the participants, as well as recording all of their stories. And what happened, you'll see here, this is our first dress rehearsal, and there's a very big screen at the back. It became a multimedia performance. On the right hand side of the stage, we set this up as a poetry writing group or story writing group. And on the left hand side of the stage, this was Louise's kitchen, which was the other set for the play. And we would light one side of the stage or the other in order to alleviate the need for people to be going on and off stage. And the large screen behind became the place where we would play the recordings of people's stories. So I'm just going to check that we can get, so this was opening night, but just let me get to a few more. So this is Louise here playing the key role, and I'm sorry I cannot remember this woman's name, but also with a brain injury, wonderful woman, and she played the facilitator of the writing group. This was a show-stopping moment, and I don't think there was a dry eye in the audience. This is the kitchen side of the stage. This is just what I wanted to show you somehow, how we'd set it up. And I'm just going to pause here because as people had told their stories, we wrote them down, as I said, asked questions and filled in the gaps. Then what we did was we had a filmmaker come in and actually record the people telling their stories. Now, they were either prompted by somebody standing next to them reading them so that they could very quickly speak the lines, or they did it themselves by somewhat improvised, but where there was stuttering, where there was repeated words, where there was coughing fits or breathing problems, the filmmaker edited all of those out and he added subtitles. And in doing so, we played all of these back to the participants. And I have to say that it was the most powerful thing I've ever done, in that these participants said that they felt heard for the first time since their accident. They felt that people had really heard them. And I think this was because we were able to put their stories back together in a way that they would have told them in the original instance, but that their brain injury had somehow taken away from them. So this was incredibly powerful. And throughout the play, these short recordings were actually put up on the, previous is what I needed, on the screen behind. Oh, nearly there. So this screen, this huge screen behind, was where these little vignettes were shown, and it was all integrated into the play. So they performed the fictional piece that we wrote whilst they were prompted by the people supporting them, who were behind them, but they did not take an active role, the supporters. They were there to support the people to perform the play. It was, really quite an incredible experience. And so throughout this process, because I was aware of the value of what was happening, it seemed really important to be assessing this. So we very quickly got some students from the university to come in and to actually do, this was in about the third session, to do a client assessment scale that we adapted from an occupational therapy and task observation scale, and to assess things like engagement, coordination, directions, quality of work, all of those sorts of things. And we, and so they did that assessment on week 3, and it was completed again in the last week, which would have been something like session 56. And as a result of that, we gathered some really interesting data and really interesting information. It was really clear from doing that assessment that participants developed social, cognitive and behavioural competencies in this really structured and supported environment. So they actually had a more rapid outcome in terms of developing these social, cognitive and behavioural competencies than the people who were not involved in the program achieved. There were other statistically significant improvements in engagement, following directions. Oh dear, I've got them off on my screen. in engagement, following directions, initiative, frustration, tolerance, and problem solving. Now, these are all really important outcomes for people with acquired brain injuries who can struggle so much with those challenges. We also had one of the men had been going to speech therapy for 3 years and had made limited progress. He was so determined that he was going to say his lines clearly, and he was going to say them with very little prompting from the text or from a mentor. And his speech therapist actually wrote a letter to the group saying, you know, I really want to know what you've been doing because I cannot believe the progress that he's made. So this was, you know, a really important outcome. We also noticed that the participant who had the anterograde amnesia, so the inability to remember even the last 5 minutes, he would come every week and he'd say, oh, who are you? And I'd say, hi, I'm Glenda. So what are we doing here? So we're doing a play. He's like, oh, really? What's the play called? So we did this every week. Well, what am I doing? Oh, you're playing one of the lead male roles. Oh, really? Okay. And the interesting thing that happened was I noticed towards the end that I was having to direct him far less. He would stand up on one side of the stage and walk to the other, and he would immediately go to the right chair. And I said to him one day, I said, Zeke, how do you know that's the chair I want you to go to? And he goes, well, it's obvious, isn't it? He said, I just thought it was obvious I went to that chair. And yet, really, the obvious one was probably one of several others. And it appears that somewhere in his body he held a memory of which chair he needed to go to. So that outcome was really quite stunning to see those sorts of things. Unfortunately, the measuring tool that we used didn't actually capture some of those things. But we did have lots of comments from people, and we had some really terrific comments. Somebody said it's changed my life. It's really given me the understanding of my potential. So this was one of the people acting. Another one said, I've realised I'm not useless and people do listen to me. I just have to learn to tell them in a different way. And I feel so much less self-critical since doing this project. I believe that this process has been an incredible tool for self-discovery, forgiveness, independence, relationship building and self-awareness. This production is also a great ABI awareness builder for the wider community. And that was from a mentor, and then we had a family member in the audience. We had many family members come up to us afterwards saying how amazing the entire process was for them and how moved they were by the performance. And I think in terms of being an awareness builder for the wider community, we had 300 boxes on stage at the end, shoe boxes. At the end of the performance, we crushed them all, and the next morning we got a call from the traffic accident people in South Australia who said, can we please give you $2,000 to put it on again? And we just crushed all the boxes. So, you know, it was really wonderful that it was, in the end, performed to almost 400 people over 2 nights. So you can see that the outcomes from this were terrific, and Michelle Bellin from Flinders University and I wrote a paper called Walk Through Wells, Dramatherapy for People with Acquired Brain Injury, and I have the link. I think I have it on this slideshow, so you should receive that. All right, so we have come to the end, really, of our session, and I'm just wondering if you're getting excited about drama therapy. I would really love to know if you have any comments or questions. Please please ask. I'm sure that Kathy will help us move through any that you might have.
Hi, Glenda. I've just got a question here in the chat box just asking about what kind of courses or short courses or workshops, etc., somebody could do if they were interested in drama therapy.
Sure. So in terms of short workshops, you know, there's lots of opportunity to engage in drama, and I think engaging in drama is really valuable. But as far as drama therapy is concerned, actually the field itself is actually particularly in Europe, UK and the US, quite a specialised field. And I think it's really important to recognise that you can't teach drama therapy in a weekend or short workshop, but you can teach certainly some things that you can take away and use. So ICON certainly run a one-day intro to art therapy, intro to drama therapy workshop, and that is actually available in, I think, all 3 states, Kathy, yes?
Oh, yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So we'll be able to get information to you about that workshop. I just can't tell you off the top of my head where else there are any short courses. But as I said, engaging in drama workshops, generally improvisation workshops, playback theatre and so on, is really valuable for building your skill set for using drama, at least as a wellbeing tool. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Another one here. How often would you record and show participants what they have been involved in, and is this part of the process of drama therapy?
Okay. Look, it's not usually a part of that, but in this instance, with people with acquired brain injuries, because they have such significant memory issues, and really when I was thinking about it, I guess I thought that it might be useful for them to see the process that they went through and be able to have something to revisit from time to time, hopefully to re-energise those feelings that they had going through the program. And so we thought it was, valuable to record it. And as a result of recording it, going through the entire process, and then having such terrific outcomes, it was part of me who wished that we'd had a professional filmmaker do the whole thing, because it was really wonderful, and professional lighting and so on. But we did it all on a very tight budget. And basically what we recorded was snippets of all of the rehearsals, the actual performance, and then afterwards the mingling with the family, the awards that they were given and so on, that were very much about a much more closed, not really for wider audience. But we knew immediately that it would be very useful for people to see the benefits in this sort of a program, which is why we have held on to the recording and continue to use it in instances like this.
Okay, we're getting close to time, so I've got a couple more questions here, but obviously if there are questions that we don't get to tonight, we can certainly answer them via email through either by Glenda or ICON can answer that. So, hi Glenda, I'm a
Kathy, can I just stop you for 1 minute? I just realised I didn't quite finish answering that question. So in terms of recording things, I would do it sometimes for feedback, particularly for people with, for instance, autism spectrum disorders. Sometimes that feedback is really good. But I would only ever do it very clearly with a therapeutic outcome, because I'm a drama therapist or an arts therapist. So I wouldn't just routinely record them. Okay, sorry, Kathy, next question.
I'm a drama teacher and I'm interested in studying the drama therapy grad dip. Would I need counselling training too?
Look, it's a tricky question. If you've been in an environment where you've been providing support, it may well be that your workplace evidence is such that you don't need to have counselling training. I think it's really important to apply, if you would like to do it, to apply, to put in your CV, all of your qualifications, and to see what the outcome is. Because I think, oftentimes we can tell from a person's, that you do an interview and you can tell from the answers to their question, their demeanour, their experience, that in fact they are very well equipped to actually do the postgraduate study. I hope that answers your question. So it's not a clear yes or no, but I will say it's absolutely not a clear no. So certainly there's a chance that you could do it.
And the last one here, I'm curious about the monologues. When the girls were doing the monologues, how were the people who had committed suicide, or the reference you made to those that had experienced somebody in their family with suicide, how were they integrated?
Okay, so what would actually happen is that oftentimes the monologues that were chosen were about something that had happened either before or after the event. Sometimes they included the person in the scene who had suicided, and other times they didn't. So this was not held in isolation. It wasn't just done as a single activity. And so the awarenesses that were developed during those monologue activities were actually taken and integrated into sort of that wider picture of awareness of you know, their response to the death, the loss, and the family response to the loss. So the monologues themselves aren't sort of a self-contained exercise, but they did offer up some really valuable opportunities for these girls to actually be able to express stuff that they just didn't feel they had a right to say. I hope that answers your question.
It's probably time to wrap it up now, I'd say.
Terrific. Look, I really hope you've all enjoyed it. I really hope you are excited about dramatherapy. I think that it is a really marvellous area for exploration, and it provides wonderful opportunities for youth in particular, but also for, you know, many other people, as you can see, and it's just generally an exciting field. So thank you all very much for coming, and no doubt everyone will hear from ICON with the links, I presume, or something to recordings and so on. And so I'll leave all that stuff to Kathy. Thank you for putting up with tonight with my scratchy throat.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.